Right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Dream Collective Leading from the Living Room webinar series. My name is Sarah Liu, the founder and managing director of the Dream Collective. And I'm really excited to actually introduce you one of my favorite business leaders actually of all time today. So super excited to be diving into the conversation. For those of you who might be dialing in for the first time or who might not know much about the Dream Collective, we are a global diversity and inclusion consulting firm headquartered in Sydney, Australia, but our footprint is very much global, and that's reflected in the audiences that are dialing in from near and afar today. I think we've got Australia, we've got Japan, we've got Singapore, and a couple of others from international markets. So really glad for all of you to be joining us today. And so today we have Nhung with us. Nhung Mason is a managing director with Accenture Australia. She has worked across consumer industries for almost 20 years. And as if though that's not impressive enough, she's voted as 40 Women to Watch in APAC from Campaign Asia. And Nhung's focus has always been in the consumer industry, but with a specific expertise around delivering customer-centric and data-driven transformation with organizations. And she's also, like myself, really super passionate about building a diverse team. So we're really excited to have Nhung with us today to share about some of the consumer research that Accenture has conducted, but as well as probably how Accenture as a company and the business is leading the way at this point in time. So a bit of some context to the thinking and sort of the concept behind the webinar topic today is that we've actually been hearing a lot from clients and partners in the market that we're now at a stage where businesses want to think about how to move forward. They're preparing themselves, readying themselves for the post-COVID-19 world. I think the initial shock, surprise, and reactive stage has sort of come and gone. But what's really important for us is to provide businesses who are looking to not just bounce back, but bouncing forward with some of the tools, knowledge, and skills and insight to equip them to embrace the new normal. So really excited to be uncovering a lot of the new research insight that Accenture has conducted to uncover the new what the new normal looks like and how consumer behavior has evolved in the post-COVID-19 world. So thank you, Nhung, for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I have to say that ditto to you in terms of inspiring female leaders. You definitely are up there. So thank you so much, and thank you to the Dream Collective for inviting me to speak today.
Awesome. So we might dive straight into it. There's a lot of richness in the research I really want to get into. So Nhung, if you want to start probably in the first few minutes of the webinar, give us an overview of some of the key findings and summaries from, I think, the Wave 4 research that Accenture has conducted around what consumer behaviors looks like in the post-COVID-19 world.
Sure. So firstly, I'm going to apologise because I will be looking to my notes as I talk to this, as we do have a lot of stats and information that's come through from the research, which hopefully will be valuable to you. So our consumer goods industry, which is a global business, has essentially been conducting consumer pulse surveys for the last probably 10, 15 years. And with COVID really obviously having such a massive impact, what we decided to do was undertake these surveys on a 2-weekly basis. And so some of the research that I'll run through with you is based on the information that's come back from this consumer set, which is across 18 markets. And in our last survey, we had over 7,000 respondents. So it's a really rich data set, and we're able to drill into that data to really understand what it is that consumers are feeling, what their intent is post-COVID. A lot of the questions that you can imagine we're getting as an organisation is, what are the trends that are going to be sticky? What do we need to prepare for now? And what we've definitely seen throughout the last couple of months is that we need to continually change the segments in which we're categorising the consumer set. So what we've done is, on a fortnightly basis, taken a data-driven approach. As you said, Sarah, that's my passion. Is to really take a data-driven approach and determine what are the segments that we're looking at now in terms of consumers. And we've categorised them at the moment as on the edge. So consumers who are really worried about health, finances, they're really, on the edge is an appropriate term because they're really super conscious of going out and very concerned for their well-being. And in total, we've got about 15% of respondents that fall into that category. Then there's a tentative returner who is cautious about re-entering and returning back to normal routines, but is wanting to. And that's about 36% of respondents. And then we've got the Me Reinvented, who are really, and there's 17% of them, they're the positive ones, right, who are essentially embracing this, seizing the opportunity to really transform themselves. And they're probably, from a demographic perspective, they tend to be in the sort of younger generation, who are really wanting to see how they can make good of this situation. And then we've got the stubbornly seeking normal. So those who are essentially saying, I don't need to change. It's okay. This will go back to normal. It will return to how it is. Sarah, you mentioned, embracing the new norm, right? The stubbornly seeking normal, 32% of people are saying, well, it'll go back to how it was. So that's sort of the categories that we've seen really pop out from our research, and looking at the buying behaviours and approach of those sort of consumer sets. And as much as the buying behaviours are quite different for those four segments, there are some norms that are constant across those, which is a massive increase in online shopping. So we've seen sort of 160% increase for consumers who typically have not really bought before, so have bought less than 25% of their purchases are online. We're seeing an overall increase of 160. And really interestingly, out of that, one of the categories that used to be very low in terms of online sales is alcobev. Right, so and we've seen that on average that's been about 200% increase. And in Australia specifically, when we've asked those consumers, what's the what's your intent post-COVID, essentially all of the people who are buying now are saying, look, they intend to continue to do that post. We're seeing that there's hesitance across the board to return to normal activities as well. So obviously markets are quite different, and we've classed markets as advancing or stabilising markets. And in Australia, we would class ourselves as stabilising. I think we have done an amazing job in Australia. Even in stabilising markets like Australia, there's still an 8% drop in the number of visits to grocery stores. So using our, we've coupled the survey research with macroeconomic data with Google sort of location information, and using the sort of Google sort of COVID mobility information. What we've seen is that actually there's been a reduction in the number of supermarket visits. In non-essential retail, we've seen a 32% drop, even in stabilising markets. For transport hubs, we've seen a 39% drop in stabilising markets. And even places of residence, so visiting friends and family, we've seen an 11. Well, actually, that's the area where we started to see an increase, right? An increase in activity. So the in-home activities and socialising in-home, we've seen an 11% increase.
Yeah. And Nhung, like, so going through the research findings, what did you personally find most surprising and unexpected?
So really, there are a number of changes that have just been accelerated. And so those, I think everyone is expecting, yeah, that's normal, right? You know, working from home, sort of purchasing online if you can't go into the store. I think no one's sort of surprised by that take-up. What's really surprised me is the intent to continue with a lot of these. And the hesitance to head out once the restrictions have been opened up. We've seen, so there are some really interesting stats around markets that have started to open up and how activity really hasn't changed much. So it's surprising to me that in sort of over the last 3 months, we've had this containment and restriction and change in rules. And when those rules have been relaxed and we're allowed to head out, we're super hesitant to. We're very conscious. And it really points to the fact that it is a new norm. And the consumer that you were working, that you thought existed before for your organisation is no longer the same consumer. And you need to re-identify, re-segment, and rethink about how you approach the relationship with that consumer.
Yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head in a sense that we have to see the segmentation in a very, very different way now, you know, instead of, I think, the very, very traditional approach of demographics, buying behavior, habits. Now is actually the mindset of, you know, me transformed versus the stubbornly seeking normal, and their intent, you know, and behavior will be completely different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I was talking to a client recently, and one of the things that we agreed on was you may have segments that you think are the same, but you cannot apply the same tactics or campaigns to those segments, because the segments, like you say, Sarah, were based on demographics, they're based on some of that hard data, but what we need to do is think about the mindset of the individuals. We need to think about the emotional state. We need to think about how they've been impacted, whether, you know, it's really hard to know who's been impacted financially, emotionally, personally through this situation. And that's really, that will change the way in which they consume.
Yeah. So Nhung, I've got a couple of questions prepared here for you as well. And at the same time, we can start taking online Q&As. So for everyone who's tuning in, feel free to submit your question in the Q&A section at the bottom of the panel, and we can address them as we go. But one thing that I noticed, Nhung, as I was going through the research, was that top two key trends was conscious buying and local buying. And they are increasing at an exponential rate. But couple that with another finding, which is that 33% consumers are now more financially squeezed, who have been financially impacted. How do you think these will translate to actual buying behavior? So my intent of buying local and conscious buying, coupled with I'm financially squeezed, how will we see that translate to actual behavior?
Yeah. It's a good question. So firstly, I think I need to emphasize that local buying does not necessarily mean more expensive, right? So, you know, in some consumer groups, it's actually the opposite. But what we're definitely seeing, and this has come out through every survey, is that local and conscious buying will stick. And as a retailer or as a consumer goods company, you do need to think about the financial challenges that a lot of individuals are facing. But what we're seeing through the research actually is that those more premium demographics are the ones that are 50% more likely to buy local. So it appears to be that it is sort of the higher income earners who are not just talking about doing it, but who are doing it. And that they are 3 times more likely to buy the more premium brands at the moment.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we spoke about segmentation, we've spoken about thinking differently in terms of your consumer segments. I think the demographic, the affluence, that sort of premium buying, it's not necessarily about the global brand dominance that they're looking for, that global recognition. What they're looking for now is sustainability and, you know, what impact the community that organisation has, and whether it is benefiting the local community.
Yeah. Great. And we've just got a question specifically around the sample size for these pulse check. And I think Nhung, you mentioned it's across 18 markets and over 7,400 respondents. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And so Nhung, what we're seeing and what you've described as well is that the consumer lives and intent have completely been upended, right? So how have you been advising your clients in this time to prioritize on? Because there's a lot of directions they can get into. How can businesses best prioritize?
So what we're actually recommending with our clients is that there is a group that focuses on COVID and looking beyond, and that this group is actually separate from your BAU team. And the reason being is it's changing every day based on the legislation, based on consumer behaviour, based on the situation with COVID. And so we're actually recommending that a task force or team is set up separately. And for that team to really be thinking holistically, not just about the consumer, but about the employee and the team member. So a lot of organisations are thinking about getting individuals working from home and making sure that they're productive. But what they're sometimes missing is the emotional and stressful situation that employees are in. And so this task force is actually just completely focused on thinking about what are the changes now that we need to put in place across our customers, across our team members, across our supply chain, across our business, that we need to think about putting in place now and the future. Because the crisis will, the impacts of the crisis will stay for a long time. We're definitely seeing evidence that behaviour is changing for the longer term and will stick. And so organisations will have to pivot and change. And just on the point of teams and sort of organising teams, one of the really interesting topics of discussion that I'm having with a lot of clients is you know, this sort of coming back into the workplace, and how do we manage that appropriately? And it's not just about, you know, smaller groups going in and working, but actually it's how do we step back and think about you're working regardless of where you are. So whether you are at home, whether you're in the office, whether you're at a cafe, whether you're going for a walk, that is still your workplace. And how do we make that work across the board? Because Sarah, if you think about things like the more informal sort of meeting points or contact points that you used to have when you used to head into the office, right? Yeah. You know, your boss might drop in informally. What are you guys up to? What are you doing? Okay, yep, that sounds good. And then they sort of get that pulse check, right, as they're walking around. They're not getting that today unless they book in a Teams call or a Zoom call, right? Unless they're making that phone call. And when they're making that phone call, it's to one person. And when they're setting up a Zoom call, it's quite a formal meeting. And so what we're really trying to work with our clients on is how do we accept this new norm and create something new that allows for some of those informal interactions, which are usually the most valuable, to still occur.
Yeah, and that probably links into one of the questions we've received online as well. How well equipped was Accenture to working from home when COVID-19 happened? And I think if you can make any references around how are you guys recreating that informal interaction, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So Accenture, we are over 500,000 people globally. And we're all on Teams. So the first thing I would say is that technology and digitization has really helped us to pivot very quickly. We are a highly digitized organization, and we were essentially able to get everyone working from home over, you know, sort of a couple of weeks. We have a lot of delivery centres in India, in the Philippines, and essentially they're all working from home. I know for some of my accounts that I lead, we were essentially able to do that over a weekend. And there are, you know, for me and my job, it was actually quite easy. I just picked up my laptop and I took it home. It is, and actually I usually always just have a laptop in my bag and that's how I work. And so for a number of us, it is the norm, sort of working from anywhere. For some of our delivery centres, it's not necessarily the norm. So they're used to going into the office. We had to move desktops home to our team members, and not all of them have space to work in. People are crowded in small spaces. So what we were very conscious of was that our leaders understood that and that they were acknowledging that and giving our team the freedom to take time off, to be flexible in their hours, to be able to talk about those challenges. And as a leadership team, we are very, very open to, you know, kids coming in and hopping on people's laps as we're having meetings. And I'm sure everyone's experiencing this now, right? You know, husbands walking in the background. And I love it. I love that we do get that little bit of insight into people's lives and we can create that connection. So I think for us, it's being very conscious that it is different and it can be challenging, and talking about it and acknowledging it. Using digital technologies to really help to connect. We encourage everyone to put video on. We use a lot of collaboration tools, digital collaboration tools like Mural, Slido to ask questions, and we find them very effective. In fact, for some of our workshops that we have with clients now, we find them a little bit more effective because everyone gets a voice. Sometimes in workshops, it's the dominant voices that are heard, whereas when we're asking everyone to sort of type in the post-it note and post it, everyone gets a voice.
That's a really, really good point, and we're seeing that in our sort of online interaction as well. I think it's a really interesting shift to see how that dynamic will carry out even post-COVID. So Nhung, you started to touch on space, right? A little bit, both I think office space and sort of retail space, and I want to talk a little bit more around that. So also in the research, we've uncovered that companies are exploring virtual alternatives to physical experiences. And that would be retail clients whose sort of only touch point previously with customers is that physical experience and that physical space. So how easy has it been in what you've seen for brands to take things online? And how do we rethink this whole approach, not just taking things online and having like a platform, but recreating a digital experience, which is quite different from just taking things online? And has there been sort of best practices that you've seen that you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I seem to be sort of on the Alco Bev bandwagon, so I'll kind of stick with that in terms of some of the examples I've seen. And the reason why it's such a fascinating sort of sub-industry segment for me is they're not traditionally online, they're not traditionally direct to consumer. And so there's a lot of change and pivot that they've had to make. So one of the really great examples that I've seen is JD.com actually collaborated with a music company and held a 3-hour live music event. And as part of that 3-hour live music event, they were showcasing like Remiss products and Carlsberg products, so alcoholic beverages, and they were allowing consumers to purchase them during the show. And they saw a 70% uptake in the purchasing of these specific brands that they were showcasing as part of that live music show. And so and I think as consumers, and this is why acceleration has happened so quickly, is we don't have a lot of choice. So we didn't have a lot of choice, right? We couldn't leave the home, we couldn't go shopping. And so what we've done is we've had to pivot. And what some of these really innovative companies have been able to do is say, okay, if consumers have to pivot, what can we give them that's just as entertaining, that will draw them in, that will excite them, and being able to create that so quickly that consumers are starting to think, actually, this is a good way to interact, right? It's a good way to make purchases. Probably the other area is retail, so grocery retail. Grocery retail in terms of penetration in Australia was really only sitting at about 4 or 5%, whereas in the UK it was up around the 10, maybe 12%. What we've now seen is that brand new users who would never dream to purchase their groceries online are doing it now. And your question was around getting hold of the consumer and exciting them to be able to do this. I mean, grocery retail doesn't sound that exciting, but what they've managed to do is create sort of essential boxes. They've made it easier for the consumer who's never really purchased online before, make it easier for them to purchase, to say, well, rather than going through all the items that I need and take that time, there's now an essentials box that I can just order, which gives me a lot of my staples and makes it easier for me to make that purchasing decision.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of a sort of digital experience that my team was sharing me about. So this DJ who's actually obviously out of work during this time, he started doing a live streaming DJ session Saturday night from home. But what he did was to take songs nomination from the audiences. So to actually address something that in a physical space people weren't doing before, because you should just get whatever the DJ serves you. Absolutely. But really, yes, turning that into a customer involvement and like an audience engagement tool.
Exactly right. And it is that engagement. I mean, we've seen it through the dominance of social media, right, over the last 10 years or so, is the consumers want to be engaged. They want that sort of two-way interaction. Probably another point to raise, Sarah, is there are companies out there who are able to win back the consumer. But they're having to do it in very different ways. And probably one of the most surprising stats that I saw through our research is Carnival Cruise, right? So, I mean, they're probably one of the hardest hit organisations. So what have they had to do in order to win back the customer is actually steep discounting. So a lot of organisations steer away from that because it sullies the brand and so on. But Carnival's recognise that they're in an extraordinary situation. And so what they've done is provided some steep discounts. And in August, they actually saw a 200% increase in bookings compared to the previous year, right? And so compared to their August sales, they saw a 200% increase in bookings with the steep discount. And so, you know, you can see that you can win back the consumer in the right way through entertaining them, through engaging them, through offering discounts. Or what Hermès did was when they opened up on their flagship store, and when they were able to open up, they got a rare shipment of goods delivered to the store, which has not been done before. So it was a special occasion, a special event, and their single day sales were the best that they'd ever had, ever. And so there are ways to address and tackle and win back the consumer, win back their trust.
Yeah, and that probably ties into one of the key findings in the research, which is about consumer creators, right? So actually think about how you can involve the consumers and letting them create that experiences.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've got a number of questions being submitted throughout the discussion already. And one thing that I wanted to probably get your thoughts on, Nhung, is, are you seeing a trend towards operational cost saving through reduction in real estate footprint as more flexible remote working and online practice may become the norm? So I think, you know, what's the impact to real estate you'll be seeing, both from an office context and retail?
Absolutely. Everyone is looking at this. So organisations that were looking to increase their footprint are no longer needing to. And a lot of organisations are looking at how they decrease that office footprint. And more importantly, how they change it. So what do they need to do in terms of the desk layout, the flow, you know, one way in, one way out. But there's definitely a strong push to consolidate and reduce that footprint. And I think that's because if you think about some of the survey results, it's that people are wanting to work from home. People actually are enjoying it, and they want to stay working from home. They feel more connected to their families. They are surprised actually that they can get work done, which previously people were concerned about. And what we've actually seen in a number of our accounts is that for some of our delivery centres is that productivity has improved. So if you think about things like shift work, it's really hard to get up and drive to the office. You're quite tired. Whereas here, they're getting back that time. They're able to be a little bit more relaxed in what they're wearing, you know, what their hair's like. And so we're seeing an increase in productivity. And so working from home is definitely a sticking trend. you know, you obviously would have seen Twitter essentially said that their employees can work from home forever if they want to. Many organisations are looking at that. And so what is the need for the office? What is, you know, what does that mean? So absolutely everyone is looking to change their strategy and approach on real estate and retail.
Yeah, and that probably links into the next question around the correlation between public transport limitation, because right now public transport is still very restricted, and that, you know, directly, I think, lowers capacity. So how much do you think this is still affecting office attendance and shopping, particularly in the CBD area? And when those restrictions have all lifted, do you see those trends continue?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing around the world, governments are encouraging people to ride bikes, and they're actually closing up roads to sort of encourage that. This is very much linked to the changes in regulation and rules. So as an example, I was on a leadership call just yesterday, and just during the call, we were told, oh, the restrictions on elevators have been changed. And so, you know, now that that's changed, we're re-looking at what we do. And so it comes back to my point earlier of every day may be different. And so if you think about public transport and some of the restrictions, you do need to stay on top of what's changing in order to understand what that impact is. But what we're seeing is people are definitely hesitant to go on public transport, but they're also more likely to stay at home. And that staying at home is not just related to hesitance to use public transport, but it's actually now they're creating the home as that place of sanctuary, as a place of entertainment, as a place of connection. And so the regulations and restrictions are changing behaviour to become normal.
Yeah. And Nhung, with all the different trends that we are seeing that you've covered in the research, we've got an audience asking, what are the BAU and potential project areas we should focus on to be proactive, creating proposals and stimulate opportunities? Are you seeing from the trend any business opportunities that you think we can proactively create? That's probably like a large, it's a big question because it's so industry, because I think it would differ industry to industry, but I think any reference point or example you can give would be great.
Yeah. So probably three things. One is e-commerce. So e-commerce is if organisations did not have a strong e-commerce presence, that's the number one thing that they're saying that they regret, right? And so a focus on how to help clients to attract, how to help them to convert, how to help drive loyalty on that different channel and that connection on a different channel. Probably number two, which is linked to e-com, is digitisation in general. And both of these are accelerating trends. And what we've definitely seen is that people can move quickly. Within the space of 24, 48 hours, new structures, new ways of working, new supply chains have been set up. And those organisations that have had a very strong digital footprint or strong foundational platforms in place were able to do that much quicker with less hiccups. And so this move to digitisation is absolutely core. And probably sort of the third area is, and this was always something that we'd spoken to clients about, but is very prevalent now, is purpose. So as an organisation, what do you stand for? What is your purpose? Has that changed now with COVID? And how do you really embody that? So whether it's sustainability, whether it is about, you know, your people and being caring for your people and being conscious. And for us as an organisation, we're a people business. We don't sell products. We don't sell software. We are a people organisation. And so it's getting back to the roots of that. So really, when we're working with organisations, we're looking at how to help them to define their purpose as an organisation, build out that vision and that roadmap, and then really help them to deliver on it and enable those capabilities. So those are probably sort of the three areas, and underpinning all of this, and as I said earlier, what I'm most passionate about is leveraging data and analytics to really help you to do that in the best way. So across e-commerce, across where it is that you're going to prioritise a digitisation, and around the purpose and that consumer set that you're driving towards.
Yeah. So e-commerce, digitization, and purpose.
Yes.
Love it. And so on purpose specifically, I hear a lot of clients say that given that we're now more and more remote and distant physically, it's going to be harder to, I think, get your team to have clarity and alignment on purpose. How do companies address that challenge? Yeah,
it's a good question. So one of the things that we've definitely seen is, as I said earlier, is the challenge to communicate and the challenge to have that genuine connection. And so what a lot of organisations are doing is they are testing and learning. And what they're doing is, I've spoken with organisations who said, we've never actually surveyed our team before, and they're starting to do it now. And so it's that two-way interaction. So how are you connecting out to your teams? And the best way to start to do that is to listen to them. And when you listen to them, you understand how they are feeling about your organisation, the purpose, the clarity of that. Then you're able to message and communicate back in the right way with them. So the first thing that you need to do is really understand, what are our communication channels with our team and with our consumers? How are we interacting with them? What, most importantly, once you need to define that purpose of your organisation. And purpose, as you know, Sarah, is not what you make, it's not what you sell, it's not what you do. It is what you stand for, the why, right? And then to actually communicate that and to develop your strategy based on that. So once you have your purpose, you have your business strategy, you develop your business model, then you have your operating model, so that all of the capabilities that you're building out anchor back to that purpose.
Yeah. And Nhung, have you seen any research around app usage and uptake? So we've got a question probably directed at the digitization reference that you made. Have you completed any research regarding app usage and the segment now using apps? And has this gone hand in hand with the online movement?
Yeah, I don't, in our studies, we haven't looked at apps specifically. I'm assuming the individual's asking about sort of mobile apps that are downloaded. We haven't seen, pointed that out specifically, but absolutely it's linked to sort of the e-com transactions and sales. And everyone would have seen, TikTok's dominance.
Yes, are you on TikTok? I'll follow you.
My kids are. I'm yet to make one, Sarah. It is a challenge. I'm keen to make one. I'm trying to do one with the transition.
Yeah, okay, all right. I'll be keeping an eye out for that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to sort of look into the research and see what we have in that space and sort of send it through. But What we generally see is that it is in line with e-com. So apps, as you know, are much stickier. So when an individual sort of downloads them. And what we're definitely also seeing is that a lot of companies are wanting to connect with the consumer in a more intimate way, which you really can only do with native apps, through notifications, through geofencing. So for them to be able to see where you are, not in a creepy way, and be able to provide you and sort of push you the right services that are more tailored to your needs.
Yeah. So off the back of that sort of digitization and sort of using especially like a very data-driven approach to making business decisions, Nhung, what if the companies aren't mature enough or set up to get the value out of their data? How do you tackle this, and what would be your recommendation? It's one of the questions that's just being submitted as well.
Lots of companies aren't, so I'll make that statement. The approach that we take to sort of building out a data and analytics capability in an organisation is that it has to be a value-based approach. So what you do is you define a use case or a value case and be very clear on the ROI of that. And once you build that out, you slowly build your platform out. What we don't recommend is that you go and you seek all of the requirements from the whole organisation in terms of what they need from a data and analytics capability and start to build out the technology for that. It should never be about the technology. It should never, ever be about the platform. It has to be about the value that it drives for you. So as an example, if you're working, if you're wanting to build out your platform, starting with, say, you know, your marketing team, then what you do is you you should co-create and develop a number of use cases of how it is that using data and analytics can actually help you to understand the consumer better. Say it's a key question. So then you define that use case, you build out a prototype, you really understand what that is, you test and learn it, right? And you take an MVP approach. And then you start to build out the platform based on that use case. And then you build that platform out slowly as you have more use cases to add to that. I have my clients sort of have fallen into two categories. One where they've got the funds and they've wanted to build out a capability, but they've done it building the platform, and then they go, okay, what are we going to do with this? Right? We've got all this data. What are we going to do with it? And it's a massive investment, and technology moves quickly. So then what you need to do is, oh no, we've got to refresh this, we've got to create this, and we still haven't created any value. Then I've got the other sort of clients who are like, we haven't invested in, we haven't done anything. And so for both of them, we're applying the same thinking in that just pause in terms of the platform, think about the use case, think about the value case and what you can drive. So that's definitely my recommendation.
Great. And we've talked a lot about B2C businesses in the sort of consumer segment. Are there any learnings as a B2B business that you can impart on? What are the implications are for B2B companies?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, and it will definitely vary by region and by market. So what we've done is we've looked at sort of the differing cycles that we're predicting for sort of different groups of markets. And I mentioned before, Australia is seen as a stabilising market. But depending on sort of the outbreak, so if you think about sort of, an up-down sort of scenario, Australia, we're lucky we're going down, then we're stabilising, right? But sort of an up-down scenario, what will happen is, say you're a consumer goods company and you're working with a cafe or a bar. They're opening, they're closing, they're opening, they're closing because of the cyclical nature of the outbreak and the impact. What clients and what we're working with clients to do is really identify which of those customers being B2B rather than consumer being B2C, which of those customers will survive this, and how, as an organisation, you can help them to survive this. How do you team with them in the right way? How do you change some of those business models? So if it's a restaurant or cafe, are you able to help them set up a delivery service or team up? So it's much more about working together within that ecosystem. And then also being realistic about some of those customers who may not survive it, and how do you help them to exit in the right way? So it is B2B, so as much as, like you said, B2C has been impacted, B2B is a much more complex and challenging area to work through because of the change in rules and regulations and what we have to be conscious of. If you're a bar, you don't want to be investing $20,000 in stocking up again, and then all of a sudden you have to close up, right? What do? There's no cash flow for you. And so organisations are really taking the time to work with those customers to try and get the best outcome. And I think this is, there's always good out of bad situations. And one of the things that has really inspired me is how everyone is taking, well, not everyone, but a lot of people are taking a step back and thinking about others, thinking about how they can support the ecosystem and the community, not just thinking about themselves.
Yeah. And so from the perspective of a B2B business, are you finding companies and your clients responding to COVID-related proposals only at the time, or are they more focused on BAU and responding to those proposals as well?
There's a lot of it is related to the impact of COVID, but there are activities that were happening anyway. So it's an acceleration of those. So have they just started up because of COVID? No. But are they related to and accelerated by COVID? Absolutely. I think it would be remiss of them not to reshape what it is that they're doing as an organisation without consideration to the impact of COVID.
Yeah. The other thing that really stood out to me in the research findings is that whether you are B2B or B2C businesses, trust is referenced throughout as absolutely critical for both internal employees and external customers and partners. So I think if you ask people, like everyone will say, yes, I know building trust is important, but practically, how can people do that? What are some of your key tips to help companies build that both internally and externally?
Number one is transparency. So how do you give customers level of visibility into your supply chain? Provenance is a big thing. So where do things come from? Where's it been? What's it touched? Obviously, we were saying 10 years ago that every organisation will be a technology organisation. And now what we're saying is every organisation will be a health organisation because everyone has to be aware of it and has to be conscious. A number of people in lifts, needing to put the Perspex glass up at serving counters. And so consumers are wanting to know more. They're wanting to understand, where's my product coming from? When you're talking about local, is it truly local? And can you tell me the provenance and information related to that? And when you do, then I trust you. There's that level of transparency. I can see it, I can understand it. So I think transparency is really, really key to trust. I think the other thing is there have been some organisations who've been a little bit, I guess maybe tone deaf in the way that they've continued to market in the same way, without pausing to think about the situation, and it hasn't sat well. And you can also, and you can definitely say the wrong sort of thing. And I'll talk to a Ellen DeGeneres example, right? That you would have seen when she was doing her live streaming, and she spoke about, it feels like being in a prison, when she's sort of broadcasting from her mansion.
That's right.
Right? Those sort of things, immediately consumers and people will make a judgment. And so, that would link to your brand, your identity. And so you've got to really think through how you navigate in this environment, because it's very different, to build that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we wrap up the session today, Nhung, I want to circle back to one really key thing that you talked about, which is people. And you spoke specifically around that Accenture is a people business. So with that, I think diversity of talent is absolutely critical, right? Especially when you lead clients through innovation, through transformation, that diversity of thoughts is just a key part that needs to power your organization. So I've got a question here around what is Accenture doing specifically to attract, retain, and advance female candidates or employees? And I think any sort of tips or advice around how are you building a diverse team internally would be really helpful.
Sure. So I'm proud to say that I've been with Accenture for 16 years. And throughout that time, I've had 3 kids. And what we're doing is we're purposeful in the way that we address diversity. And diversity for us is not just gender, it is wide-ranging. And one of the things that we're very conscious to do is set quotas. And not all organisations believe in that, but we absolutely do. We stand behind the fact that there is an imbalance today, and to correct that imbalance, you do need to make some extraordinary steps to do that. And so we will hire more females at the grad level, because we know that sort of slowly changes as they become more senior because of life. We will only promote 50-50 MDs. So I've been a partner with Accenture for 5 years now, and it's just, one of the things that I'm super passionate about is supporting that diversity in leadership. And so we, and as a leadership team, we all talk about it. We are given the stats, we are measured against it. So there are quotas, there are measurements, and that changes our culture and it changes our mindset, because it's not just about talking about it, it's actually making it a part of our KPIs, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, to answer your question, we are purposeful in the way we look at diversity. And probably one thing that's really stood out for me, because when you think about diversity, of course, it's genders and backgrounds and ethnicity and how people view themselves from a gender basis. But there's also mindsets. And when you first join Accenture, one of the things that we get everyone to do is undertake a strengths survey. Is what we focus on is people's strengths. So then you're given your top 5 strengths. And we actually use this information to put together the most diverse teams when we are working on different programs and different accounts. So when we're doing our account planning, we will pull the strengths of all of our teams to ensure that we have that diversity of thinking and mindset and capabilities in the team.
Yeah. And I know we're at time. We've still got actually 2 more questions being submitted. So Nhung, I might share with you probably separately after that. So thank you so much for the fantastic insight sharing. And it's great to know not only what the market is doing, but also what Accenture specifically is doing as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Nhung. And for everyone who's watching as well, make sure you stay connected. We would love to share more data insights with you. And in fact, we have actually conducted our own research as well with Dynata on how 50-50 gender split leadership team had a positive impact for decision-making and companies' ability to pivot and innovate during COVID as well. So really looking forward to be sharing those insights and research with you. Also feel free to stay connected so we can share with all that updates with you. So thank you once again for your time, Nhung.
Thank you, Sarah.
I know speaking with you always. And thank you everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you so much, Sarah and the Dream Collective. That was fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Nhung. Bye.
Yes, bye.